The sound of her own heart breaking was lost in the polite applause. Sarah stood at her post, spine a rod of iron, gaze fixed on the empty space just beyond the king's shoulder. Her ceremonial armor, usually a comfort, felt like a cage constricting her lungs. Each clap from the assembled Moroi nobility was a hammer blow against the fragile thing in her chest. She did not look at Prince Alexei, whose golden head was bowed in a perfect, charming display of humility, as his brother, King Dmitri, announced the betrothal to the court. She did not look at the woman beside Alexei, Lady Seraphine Valamont, a full-blooded Moroi whose hand he held with a possessiveness Sarah had spent 6 years dreaming about. Most of all, she did not look at King Dmitri, her charge, who stood before the throne making the formal proclamation, and who she knew, without a doubt, had his dark eyes fixed on her, even as he spoke the words that shattered her world. The word betrothal echoed in the grand ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and sinking into the velvet draperies. It was a beautiful word for an ugly thing. An ending. A lie exposed. For 6 years she had been the king's shadow, a Dhampir guardian sworn to protect the vampire king who ruled their world. The best of her generation, they said, the youngest ever appointed to the king's personal detail. Loyal, steady, uncompromising in her duty. When she wore the armor, when she stood at her post, when steel sang and threats emerged, she was perfect, flawless. A weapon honed to protect one life above all others. Her eyes never wandered, her focus never wavered. She was legendary for a reason. But in the hours between shifts, in the stolen moments when duty ended and life began, in the secret places where no one else could see, she had been his. Or so she had believed. For 6 years, Alexei had sought her out in the quiet hours, after she removed her armor and became just Sarah again, in empty corridors when her shift ended, in secluded gardens under moonlight, in the library's hidden alcoves where no courtiers ventured. He had been careful, so careful. He knew when she was off duty, knew when she could be found alone, knew exactly how to make her feel like she was the only person in his world. He had kissed her in the shadows, whispered promises against her skin, told her to be patient, that he was working on a way, that bloodline politics were complicated, but he would find a path. "I don't care what they say," he had murmured 100 times, his hands tangled in her hair. "I don't care about pure bloodlines. It's you, Sarah. It's always been you. Just give me time." And fool that she was, she had believed him. She had kept their secret faithfully, never speaking of it to anyone, never letting it show when she was on duty. When she wore the armor, she was the king's guardian, professional, distant, perfect. When she took it off, she was Alexei's, his secret, his promise, his future. That was why Dmitri had never reassigned her. Because when it mattered, when steel was drawn or threats emerged or the king's life hung in the balance, Sarah was ice. She was death. She was the best. The king had never seen her with Alexei. No one had. They had been so careful, but Dmitri was not a fool. She suspected he had guessed. The way his dark eyes would linger on her sometimes when she returned from her off hours. The slight tension in his jaw when Alexei made some casual remark in her presence during official functions. The king saw everything, even the things people tried to hide. But he had said nothing, had never reassigned her, had trusted that she would never let her personal life compromise her duty. And she hadn't. Not once, not ever. But now, standing at attention while the man she had loved in secret for 6 years announced his betrothal to another, she understood the truth with devastating clarity. There had been no complications to work through, no path he was trying to find. A Dhampir bride would have meant diluted blood, half-human children, political scandal. She had been convenient, a secret he could keep without consequences, someone to make him feel desired and rebellious without actually risking anything. He had promised her forever in the dark, while planning his perfect, pure-blooded future in the light. Her world had shrunk to the space inside her armor, to the desperate task of keeping her breathing even. A single tear, a tremor in her hand, a crack in the granite facade of her professionalism would be a betrayal of her duty. And her duty was all she had left. Somewhere in the hollow space behind her ribs, a scream was building, a primal thing of grief and rage. It would never be heard. She was a guardian, a statue, and statues do not weep. Sarah was the Dhampir shadow that guarded the Vampire King, the most lethal weapon in his arsenal, flawless when duty called. Dimitri was the king that everyone overlooked socially, bound by duty and the endless weight of the crown, working through the nights while others celebrated. And Alexei was the golden prince they all adored, the charming younger brother who captured every heart in every room, despite having no throne of his own. This was the story of how a heart, broken in the gilded cage of a vampire court, learned to see in the dark. It was not a story of grand passions or loud declarations, but of a reckoning fought in silence, of a love discovered not in sunlight, but in the steady, patient presence of a king who had been there all along, waiting in the shadows he called home. A king who had known about the secret all along and had suffered in silence. The applause finally subsided, replaced by the murmur of congratulations and the swell of the orchestra. The performance was over, the celebration could begin. Sarah's shift was not. She remained at her post, a living gargoyle carved from duty and despair. Her body was a marvel of discipline, executing its functions with a precision that felt alien to the chaos storming inside her. Her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats, mapping exits, tracking the crowd with the deadly efficiency that had made her legendary among the Dhampir Guard. She watched Alexei accept the backpats and reverent handshakes, his smile never faltering. He was magnificent. He was born for this, for the adoration, for being the prince who could still walk freely in daylight without the weakness that plagued full-blooded vampires. The prince who never had to bear the crushing weight of the crown. He caught her eye across the room, just for a second. He offered a small, apologetic smile. Not the secret, intimate one he had given her 100 times in darkened corridors, but something else. Something that said, "You understand, don't you? You always knew this was how it had to be." And that, more than the announcement itself, was what finally fractured the ice in her veins. He thought she had known. He thought their 6-year secret affair had been some mutual understanding that it could never be real. That the promises whispered against her skin in the dark had been pretty lies they were both agreeing to. That when he said, "forever," she had somehow understood he meant, "for now." To him, she had been a beautiful secret. A rebellion that cost him nothing. The king's legendary guardian who would never tell. Who would keep his confidence even as he broke her heart. The realization was a cold, clean shame. He had not just led her on, he had never intended to follow through. Every kiss had been a lie. Every promise had been a game. Every whispered "I love you" in the secret dark had meant nothing at all. When her replacement finally arrived, the handover was clipped and professional. Sarah offered the standard report: all secure, no incidents of note, threat assessment minimal, perimeter clear. And the words were delivered with the crisp precision that had earned her this posting at 22. Walking away from her post felt like stepping off a cliff. The ballroom noise faded behind her as she moved through the service corridors, her armored boots echoing a funereal rhythm on the stone floors. The path to the barracks was a blur. She stripped off her armor piece by piece, the familiar weight of it leaving her feeling unnervingly light, exposed. She did not look in the mirror. She could not bear to see the face of the Dhampir woman who had believed a Moroi prince's secret promises. Duty, however, was not yet done. She was expected to offer her personal congratulations. It was protocol. It was torture. She found him in one of the smaller private gardens, one of their gardens, where he had kissed her 1,000 times. A glass of blood wine in his hand, holding court with a small circle of fawning nobles. He saw her approach and his face shifted, just for a moment, something that might have been guilt flickering in his eyes, before the charm smoothed it away. "Sarah, there you are." His voice was warm but not intimate, friendly but not familiar. The voice he used for acquaintances, not for the woman he had held in his arms just 3 nights ago in this very garden, promising he was close to a solution. She stopped a respectful 5 paces away and inclined her head. "Your Highness, my sincerest congratulations on your betrothal. May you and Lady Seraphine know a lifetime of happiness." The words were perfect. They were ripped from a textbook on courtly etiquette. They felt like they were being spoken by someone else. Each one was a blade, cutting away the secret they had shared. Alexei waved a dismissive hand, his rings flashing in the lamplight. The others in his circle began to drift away, sensing a private moment. When they were alone as they had been so many times before, his voice dropped to that intimate murmur she knew so well. "Sarah, He stopped, looking at her with something that might have been regret. "You understand, don't you? The politics of it? My father's legacy? The bloodlines? I never meant to." He paused, seeming to search for words. "What we had was real, but this is necessary." What we had, past tense, as if 6 years could be summed up and dismissed in 3 words. He was trying to let her down gently, trying to make sure she would keep their secret even now, making sure she understood that she could never speak of what they had been to each other, that it would damage them both. "Your Highness has a duty to your bloodline," she said, her voice flat, each word carefully controlled. "I have always understood duty." She had not said she understood him, had not said she forgave him, had not given him the absolution he was seeking. His smile faltered. "Sarah, I wish you every happiness, Your Highness." She said it louder this time, her voice carrying. Professional, final, a door closing. Before he could reply, a quiet voice cut through the air from the shadows of the colonnade. "Alexei." King Dmitri emerged from the darkness, seeking the shadows as he always did, most comfortable where the moonlight barely reached. He was dressed in severe black, a stark contrast to his brother's celebratory silver and gold. His pale skin seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it, and there was a stillness about him that marked him as one of the old bloodlines, powerful and ancient. The faint hollowness in his cheeks suggested he had not fed recently, his last sustenance likely taken hours ago, before the ceremony. He looked from his brother to Sarah, his dark eyes missing nothing. In that single glance, she knew. He had known all along. Perhaps not the details, but enough. Enough to understand what she had just lost. The air crackled with a new tension. Alexei straightened, his politician's mask sliding back into place. "Brother, I was just receiving Guardian Sarah's well wishes." "The Council awaits your response regarding the Valmont alliance terms," Dmitri said, his voice low and even. He did not acknowledge her, did not look at her directly, but she felt the weight of his awareness like a physical thing. It was a rescue, a lifeline. A way to end this conversation before she broke. Alexei hesitated, glancing between them, perhaps sensing something he couldn't quite name. "Of course, duty calls." He looked at Sarah one last time, and she saw it clearly now, the relief in his eyes. Relief that she was handling this well, that she wasn't making a scene, that their secret would stay buried. She gave him nothing. No tears, no anger, no pain. Just the blank professional mask of a guardian, who had delivered her required pleasantries. Alexei turned and walked back toward the palace, leaving her alone with his brother, in the garden where she had given away 6 years of her heart to a man who had never intended to keep it. Dmitri did not move, did not speak. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "Your Majesty, she started, her voice cracking for the first time. "You are off duty for the remainder of the evening," he said quietly, still not looking at her directly. "I have reassigned your night rotation." He was giving her permission to fall apart, to leave, to not have to hold herself together anymore. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she whispered. He said nothing more, simply turned and followed his brother back toward the palace, leaving her alone in the garden full of ghosts and broken promises. She stayed there until the memory of Alexei's touch on her skin felt like a brand she needed to scrub away. Then she turned and walked, not to the barracks, but to the stairs that led to the roof. Her sanctuary, the one place that had always been only hers, never tainted by Alexei's presence. The wind was sharp and clean atop the eastern battlement. It whipped her unbound hair across her face and bit at the skin exposed by her simple tunic. Down below, the castle was a symphony of light and music, a world away. Here, there was only the wind, the cold stone beneath her boots, and the sprawling darkness of the city dotted with a million tiny, indifferent lights. She had been coming here for years, her secret sanctuary, a place to breathe when the gilded walls felt too close, the one place Alexei had never found, had never invaded. She didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears, a solid, unmovable mass lodged in her throat. Crying felt like a surrender, and she had not survived 6 years as a Dhampir guardian by surrendering. She stood at the edge, her hands gripping the cold, rough stone of the crenellations, and stared into the night. She catalogued the pain, dissected it with the same dispassionate precision she used to analyze threat patterns. It had been real to her. Every stolen kiss, every whispered promise, every moment in the dark when he had held her and sworn he was finding a way. She had believed in their secret future, had imagined continuing as a guardian, even as his wife, because her calling was who she was. She had built a cathedral of hope on foundations of sand, and now it had all come crashing down. She replayed 6 years of secret meetings in her mind, the first time he had found her in the library after her shift, making an excuse to talk to her alone. The first kiss, hidden behind the stables, the promises that had grown more elaborate with each passing year. Just a little longer. Just let me work out the politics. Just trust me. She had trusted him, and he had lied with every breath. The scrape of a boot on stone behind her made her stiffen. She didn't turn. She knew the tread. She had been guarding the Vampire King for 6 years, and she knew Dmitri's step as well as her own heartbeat. Dmitri came to stand beside her, his presence a solid block of silence in the howling wind. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the same distant horizon. He was giving her the one thing she craved, the dignity of her own grief. He wasn't offering platitudes or demanding explanations. He wasn't asking her to confirm what he had already guessed. He was just there. Minutes stretched into an hour. The music from the party below faded as the night deepened. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a shared space, a container for everything she couldn't say. He had known. All this time he had known about the secret affair, about the promises, about the way she disappeared into private spaces with his brother when her shifts ended. And he had never said a word, had never punished her for it, had never reassigned her. Because when it mattered, when she wore the armor and stood at her post, she was flawless. And perhaps because confronting it would have forced her to face a truth she wasn't ready to see. Finally, his low voice reached her, barely more than a murmur on the wind. "It's cold." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an order to leave. It was a simple statement of fact, an anchor in the swirling vortex of her emotions. I don't feel it, she lied. She was shaking, but not from the cold. He said nothing for a long time. Then he shrugged out of his heavy formal coat, the dark wool seeming to absorb the moonlight, and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was cool from his body. Vampires ran cold, not warm like her half-human blood, and it smelled faintly of old books and night air. The weight of it was grounding, a sudden, shocking gesture of care. She flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. "You're on duty tomorrow at dawn," he said, his tone still even, betraying nothing. "You should get some rest." She nodded, unable to form words. The kindness of it, so simple and so unexpected from a king who had every reason to be angry with her, was a greater threat to her composure than Alexei's betrayal had been. He was treating her not as a guardian who had been compromised, not as a fool who had been used, but as a person in pain. He turned to leave, his footsteps quiet on the stone. "Your Majesty," she managed to say, her voice rough. It never affected my duty. I swear to you, I never." He paused, his back to her. "I know." 2 words, but they held everything. He had known about the affair and had trusted her anyway, had seen her pain tonight and had still trusted her to do her duty tomorrow. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't turn around. He merely lifted a hand in acknowledgement before disappearing down the stairwell, leaving her alone with the wind, the city lights, and the heavy weight of his coat around her shoulders. She pulled it tighter, burying her face in the collar, and for the first time that night, she felt the hot sting of tears. He hadn't tried to fix her. He hadn't demanded explanations or made her feel ashamed. He had simply sat with her in the ruins until she was ready to stand on her own. And in the desolate landscape of her heart, that small, quiet act felt like the first sign of life. The months that followed were a study in gray. Life in the castle marched on, pulled forward by the unstoppable momentum of a royal wedding. The halls were draped in the Valamont silver and the royal gold. Artisans and seamstresses bustled through the corridors. The air hummed with preparations, a constant, cheerful reminder of Sarah's private humiliation. She moved through it all like a ghost, her face a mask of professional indifference. She did her job. She trained. She stood guard. She was a model of efficiency. On duty, she was flawless. Her threat assessments were legendary. Her reaction times were unmatched. When she wore the armor, nothing else existed. Not heartbreak, not betrayal, not 6 years of secret lies. Only the mission. Only the king's safety. It was what she had been born to do, and she did it better than anyone alive. Off duty, she became a ghost. She stopped going to the library in the evenings, couldn't bear the memories of the alcove where he had first kissed her. She avoided the gardens entirely. She took her meals in her quarters instead of the common rooms. She saw Alexei often, of course. It was impossible not to in the castle, but something fundamental had shifted. She no longer sought him out, no longer engineered her off-duty hours to coincide with his availability. When they passed in corridors, she gave him the same respectful nod she would give any member of the royal family. Nothing more. He tried, at first, to catch her alone. She saw him waiting near the barracks after her shifts, lingering in corridors he had no reason to be in. She avoided him with the same tactical precision she used to neutralize threats. After a few weeks, he stopped trying. Perhaps he was relieved. Perhaps he had already moved on, his conscience clear now that the wedding plans consumed all his time. His secret was safe. His future was secure. She watched him with Seraphine and saw it clearly now. The performance of it all. The grand gestures made for the court's benefit, the charm deployed like a weapon. He would kiss his fiancée's hand with a flourish for the assembled nobles. But Sarah noticed he never looked at Seraphine the way he used to look at her in the dark. With hunger, with need. Because Seraphine was real, official, a commitment he couldn't take back on a whim. Sarah had been safe to desire because she could be hidden. Seraphine was the one he actually had to live with, forever. In the void Alexei left, Dmitri's presence grew. It was never invasive, never demanding. It was simply there, a quiet constant in her altered world. She would be in the training yard at dawn, running drills until her muscles screamed, trying to sweat out the restlessness in her soul, and he would be there, sparring with the captain of the guard. The king rarely slept during daylight hours, using the time when other Moroi were weakened by the sun to train with his Dhampir guardians who thrived in it. He moved with a brutal, contained grace, every strike precise and purposeful. There was no wasted motion, no flourish. It was the opposite of Alexei's fighting style, which was all flash and dazzling parries. Dmitri fought not to impress, but to win. He began to spar with her. Their first session was a silent, violent conversation. He didn't go easy on her. He pressed her, forcing her to move past her exhaustion to find a deeper well of strength. He anticipated her moves, countered her best attacks, and disarmed her 3 times in the first 10 minutes. But it wasn't cruel, it was instructive. He would stop, adjust the angle of her wrist, demonstrate a more effective block. He was teaching her. He was paying attention. "You rely too much on speed," he said, his voice a low rasp as they circled each other, practice swords held at the ready. "You're faster than most, but against a stronger opponent, you'll tire first. Use their momentum against them. Less force, more structure." She tried it, and the next time he lunged, she redirected his blade with a turn of her wrist, stepping inside his guard and pressing the blunted tip of her sword to his chest. They stood frozen for a moment, the morning sun casting long shadows across the yard. She could train in full daylight without weakness, her Dhampir blood protecting her, while he would need to withdraw soon before the sun climbed higher and sapped his strength. His chest rose and fell beneath her blade. His dark eyes held hers, and for the first time she saw something flicker in their depths. Not praise, but a profound, startling respect. "Better," was all he said, stepping back. He started appearing in the training yard during her off-duty hours, during the times when she used to slip away to meet Alexei. Never commenting on it, never mentioning the change in her routine, just there. She would be seated on a bench, rapping her bruised knuckles, and he would settle nearby with a tactical manual, reading in comfortable silence. One evening, she was alone in a small library, not the grand one where she and Alexei used to meet, but a lesser-used room filled with military histories. She had taken to coming here, to this space that held no memories of betrayal. She looked up from her book to find a rare, leather-bound volume on Dhampir fighting formations sitting on the table beside her. The same topic she had been researching. There was no note, no indication of who left it, but she knew. The gesture was so quiet, so specific. He was paying attention to what she studied, what she needed, without ever demanding her attention in return. This quiet accumulation of moments began to unnerve her. After 6 years of secret passion, of stolen kisses and whispered promises, this felt like something else entirely. It was patient, steady, visible in its very invisibility. He was always nearby, but never demanding, never taking, never asking for anything she wasn't ready to give. She finally broke the silence one afternoon. She was on watch in a quiet gallery of portraits, the faces of long-dead Moroi ancestors staring down with painted indifference. He appeared at the far end of the hall, ostensibly examining a tapestry. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, and she noticed how he kept to the shadowed side of the corridor, away from the direct light that would weaken him. But he wasn't looking at the tapestry. He was looking at her. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, steady and unwavering. She should have stayed professional, should have kept the wall up, but the months of silence, of grief, of watching him watch her without ever asking why, finally broke something loose. Why? The word was abrupt, torn from her before she could stop it. His brow furrowed slightly. Why what, guardian? Why are you… She stopped, struggling for words. You knew. All this time you knew about your brother and me. You could have reassigned me, should have. I was compromised, You were never compromised, he interrupted quietly, his voice firm. When you wore the armor, when you stood at your post, you were perfect. What you did in your own time was your own business. He stepped closer, staying in the shadows. I am not my brother, Sarah. I do not punish people for being human, for hoping, for trusting. The words settled between them like stones. You should have said something. You should have stopped me from being such a fool. He gave a small, sad shake of his head. You would not have believed me. You would have thought I was jealous, or interfering, or trying to control you. His dark eyes held hers with devastating honesty. You had to see it yourself. I could only wait, and hope that when you finally did, you would still be standing. She felt her throat tighten. He had known, had watched her give her heart away to someone who would never keep it, had watched her slip away to secret meetings with his brother, and had simply waited, protecting her professional reputation even as he watched her personal life crumble. Why? She asked again, but this time the question was different. Because you deserved someone who didn't make you wait in secret, he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the empty hall. Someone who wasn't ashamed to claim you. Someone who saw your worth and wasn't afraid of what it would cost to keep you. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She started, but couldn't finish. You don't have to know what comes next, he said gently. You just have to know you don't have to stand on that roof alone anymore. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between them. I'll still be here, not in secret, not with promises I don't intend to keep. Just here. And then he was gone, his footsteps receding down the hall, leaving her alone with the silent portraits and the deafening echo of his promise. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a proposition. It was something far more powerful. A vow of presence without conditions. He wasn't asking for anything. He was simply offering a place to stand, solid ground in the wreckage of her world. She leaned her head back against the cool wall, closing her eyes. For 6 years, she had loved a man who only wanted her in the dark, who had made her a secret to keep. And here was a king offering to stand beside her in the light, asking for nothing, promising only that he would be there. The difference was staggering. Dimitri's words became the pivot on which her world turned. I'll still be here. It was a promise kept, not in grand pronouncements, but in the steady, unassuming rhythm of his nights. His presence was no longer a question she needed to answer, but a fact she began to rely on. The awareness shifted from a nervous, he is here, to a comforting, he is here. She started to watch him with the same sharp-eyed focus she applied to her duties. It was a revelation. For 6 years, Dimitri had been a part of the scenery of her life, the vampire king she guarded, always eclipsed in her vision by his brilliant brother. The king she had been protecting while she gave her heart away to someone else. Now, she was truly seeing him for the first time. She saw the weight he carried. While Alexei charmed foreign dignitaries and posed for portraits, Dimitri was the one in the council meetings that stretched through the night, his face grim as he reviewed border disputes and bloodline politics and trade agreements. He was the one who walked the castle walls in the dark hours, speaking to the Dampier guards on duty, asking their names, inquiring about their families. They respected him. More than that, they trusted him. Alexei was the prince they cheered for. Dmitri was the king they would die for. She noticed the small things, the way he always chose the least comfortable chair in a room, leaving the better ones for others, the way he listened, truly listened, when someone spoke, his focus absolute. He had a dry, subtle wit that only surfaced in rare moments, a quick, quiet comment that could dismantle a pompous courtier's argument with surgical precision. He was not the absence of light that she had always assumed. He was a different kind of light, the light of moon and stars, the kind that guided you through darkness rather than blinding you with brilliance, the kind that didn't ask you to hide. Her training sessions with him became the anchor of her week. He pushed her relentlessly, stretching her limits, but always with a purpose. He was forging her into a better guardian, a sharper weapon. The physicality of it was intense, a brutal ballet of sweat and steel, the constant contact, the press of his body as he demonstrated a hold, the grip of his hand on her arm as he corrected her form. It began to feel less like training and more like a conversation. Her body learned the rhythm of his before her mind did. She learned the subtle shift in his weight that preceded a lunge, the slight tensing of his jaw before he went on the offensive. One morning, the air was thick with the coming rain. They were the only two in the yard, the clash of their wooden swords echoing in the heavy silence. The sun had not yet climbed high enough to weaken him. He was faster than usual, his attacks more aggressive. She was forced onto the defensive, her feet skidding in the dirt as she gave ground. He disarmed her, his sword at her throat, his body pinning hers against the unforgiving stone of the armory wall. They were chest to chest, breathless. The smell of rain and sweat and steel filled her senses. His eyes, usually so controlled, burned with a fierce, contained fire. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "My footwork," she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Liar," he breathed. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, a flicker of heat that arced between them, more potent than any physical blow. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken things. This was different from Alexei's secret touches in the dark. This was broad daylight, visible to anyone who walked by. He wasn't hiding her, wasn't afraid to be seen wanting her. This was a line, and they were standing on the very edge of it. The world narrowed to the space between their bodies, to the coolness of his breath on her skin. He held the position for a heartbeat longer, a silent question hanging in the air. Then, as if pulling himself back from a great height, he stepped away, lowering his sword. The spell was broken. "Your footwork was sloppy," he said, his voice once again cool and controlled. "You were distracted. In a real fight, you'd be dead." He turned and walked away toward the castle, seeking the shelter of stone walls as the sun climbed higher. She knew he would need to withdraw soon, to rest in darkness or feed before the daylight sapped too much of his strength. He had created the danger, then saved her from it. He had shown her a glimpse of the inferno he kept so carefully banked, and it both terrified and fascinated her. But unlike Alexei, he had done it in the light, where anyone could see, where she wasn't a secret to be kept, but a person to be wanted without shame. The incident she would later think of as the turning point came a few weeks later. A border dispute with a neighboring Strigoi territory had escalated. Tensions in the palace were high. A delegation arrived for negotiations, their leader a notoriously slippery Moroi duke known for his arrogance. Dmitri assigned Alexei to lead the welcome, a political alliance Dmitri had brokered, making the younger prince's participation diplomatically essential. A task that suited his talents for charm and ceremony, while the king himself oversaw the security arrangements. Sarah was part of Dmitri's detail, assigned to a discreet observation post overlooking the main courtyard where the reception was to take place. From her vantage point, she had a clear view of the entire scene. Alexei was in his element, his laughter echoing as he greeted the Duke and his entourage. It was a masterful performance of hospitality and effortless power. She felt nothing watching him. No longing, no pain. Just a distant clinical assessment of his performance. But Sarah, trained by Dmitri to look beneath the surface, saw what others missed. She saw the Duke's senior Moroi guard mapping the courtyard with his eyes, noting sightlines and exit points. She saw two of the delegates separate from the group, their movements casual but deliberate, as they drifted toward a less guarded postern gate. It was subtle, but it was wrong. She reported her observations to Dmitri over the discreet communication link in her ear. His response was immediate and calm. Hold your position, observe, do not engage. Down below, the Duke presented Alexei with a ceremonial vial of rare blood wine, a supposed gesture of goodwill. As Alexei reached for it, Sarah saw the glint of metal on the hand of the Duke's guard. Not a weapon, but a signet ring with a sharp, pointed edge, a pinprick, a scratch. Enough to deliver a fast-acting toxin that could weaken even a Moroi prince. Her training screamed at her to intervene, to shout a warning. But Dmitri's order had been clear. She trusted him. Her eyes darted around the courtyard, trying to see the larger pattern he was seeing. And then she saw it. Dmitri's own men, the elite shadow guard, all Dhampirs like her, were not in their ceremonial positions. They had melted into the crowd, disguised as servants and courtiers. They were already moving, a silent, deadly net closing in. Just as Alexei's fingers were about to touch the vial, a servant stumbled, spilling a tray of goblets with a tremendous crash. The diversion was perfect. In the split second of chaos, two of Dmitri's guards had flanked the Duke, while another intercepted the delegates by the postern gate. It was over before it began. No alarm was raised, no overt threat was made. The Duke's men were quietly and efficiently neutralized and escorted away for questioning. Alexei, startled by the noise, looked momentarily annoyed at the interruption. He never even saw the danger. He smiled, made a joke about the clumsiness of the staff, and seamlessly continued the reception. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his life had been seconds from ending, saved by a king he overshadowed in every ballroom. A king whose guardian he had used and discarded without a second thought. Later that evening, Dmitri found her as she was coming off her shift. The palace was buzzing with a sanitized version of the day's events. A minor diplomatic misunderstanding, swiftly resolved. Only a handful of people knew the truth. "You did well today," he said, falling into step beside her in the shadowed corridor. Night had fallen, his time of full strength. "Your observations were critical." "You knew," she stated. It wasn't a question. "You knew they would make a move." "I suspected they might test our defenses," he corrected mildly. "The Duke is a Moroi who prefers to negotiate from a position of strength. Taking my brother hostage would have given him considerable leverage. Alexei is beloved. His loss would have been destabilizing." "You used him as bait," she said, a chill running down her spine. "My brother is the beloved prince," Dmitri said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He is the face the people love, the charm they adore. Such things are useful. They draw fire." He paused, looking at her. "But I would never have let any harm come to him, or to my people." His eyes held hers. "Including you. The men you saw by the gate were the primary threat. Their goal was to create a secondary crisis to cover the abduction. Your post would have been their first target. I had 3 of my best Dhampirs within 10 feet of you the entire time." The revelation hit her with stunning force. He hadn't just been protecting his brother, the brother who had stolen kisses from his guardian in the dark. He had been protecting her. Not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, invisible web of safety she hadn't even known was there. It was the ultimate expression of his nature, pragmatic, ruthless, and fiercely protective. The king who worked in shadows to keep everyone else safe in the light, even the guardian who had given her heart to his brother. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice quiet. Because I needed you focused on your task, not on your own safety. I needed your eyes, and I trusted you to do your duty. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully in the empty corridor. I trust you, Sarah. I always have. He said it so simply, a plain statement of fact, but in the silent, guarded world he inhabited, she knew those words were more precious than any jewel. They were a confession. In that moment, the last lingering ghost of Alexei faded into nothingness. The memory of secret promises and hidden kisses couldn't compete with the solid reality of the man standing before her, the vampire king who had known about the affair all along and had protected her anyway, who saw her not as a secret to be kept, but as a guardian worthy of his trust, worthy of his protection. He had been there all along, not in her line of sight, but watching her back while she gave her heart away to someone else. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would never make that mistake again. The weeks leading up to the royal wedding were a blur of heightened security and suffocating ceremony. Sarah moved through it all with a newfound sense of purpose. Her focus was singular, Dmitri. The dynamic between them had shifted from the subtle pull of unspoken feelings to a taut, resonant hum of acknowledged connection. They had not spoken of the moment in the training yard, nor of his confession of trust, but the words lingered in the air between them, changing everything. She became his shadow in a way that transcended duty. When he worked late into the night in the strategy room, poring over maps and blood supply reports and security protocols, she would stand guard outside his door, no longer just a sentry, but a willing guardian. Sometimes he would open the door, his face etched with fatigue, and simply look at her for a moment. In his eyes, she saw the crushing weight of his responsibilities, the loneliness of his command, the burden of being the king who did all the work while his brother received all the love, the brother who had taken from him without thought. He would offer her a small, tired smile. And in that silent exchange, she felt a sense of partnership that was more profound than any spoken declaration, more real than any promise whispered in the dark. Alexei, wrapped in the cocoon of his own impending nuptials, seemed oblivious to the change. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. His secret was safe, his future secure. Once, she caught him watching her from across a corridor, something unreadable in his expression. But when their eyes met, he simply looked away and kept walking. They had nothing left to say to each other. The secret affair that had consumed 6 years of her life was over, buried, never to be acknowledged again. She found she didn't miss it. Didn't miss the constant vigilance of keeping secrets, the fear of being discovered, the weight of promises that were never meant to be kept. What she had with Dmitri, this quiet, steady presence, felt like coming up for air after years of drowning. He found her one evening in the small library, the one that had become her refuge. She was reading a tactical manual, making notes, and didn't hear him approach until he was standing beside her table. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. She nodded, and he settled into the seat, a glass of blood wine in his hand, his sustenance taken care of, his strength restored. "The final security arrangements for the wedding are in place," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The ceremony will be in the main cathedral. You'll be on the dais, just to the left of the altar. You will have a clear view of the entire nave." "And you?" she asked. "I will be standing beside my brother," he said, a flicker of something, resignation, irony, in his eyes. "Playing my part, witnessing his joy." She studied his face in the lamplight, the strong lines of his jaw, the shadows that seemed to perpetually gather in the hollows of his cheeks, the way the darkness seemed to embrace him rather than diminish him. She had learned to read the subtle tells in his stoic expression. The slight tightening around his eyes meant he was worried. The barely perceptible downturn of his mouth meant he was weary. "It must be difficult," she said softly. He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "What must be?" "Being the king who does everything while he gets all the love? Always cleaning up his messes? Always standing in the shadows while he stands in the light?" She hesitated, then added quietly, "Always knowing that he takes without thought, even from you." His eyes held hers for a long moment, and she saw the flash of understanding there. He knew she wasn't just talking about political burdens anymore. "When we were boys," he began, his voice quiet, "my father gave us each a falcon. Alexi's was a magnificent gyrfalcon, pale silver. Mine was a common peregrine, dark and unremarkable. Alexei named his Moonwing and would spend hours flying him for the court, showing off his grace and speed. Everyone was dazzled." He took a sip from his glass. "My falcon was not as fast, not as beautiful, but she was a better hunter, more patient, more lethal." One evening, Alexei grew careless. He flew Moonwing too close to the eastern cliffs during a storm. The falcon was caught in an updraft and dashed against the rocks. Alexei was devastated. Not because the bird was dead, but because his prize was broken. He refused to even go and retrieve the body. Dimitri's gaze met hers across the table, and the pain in them was ancient. "I went. I climbed those cliffs in the storm and I brought the bird back so he could be buried. My father told me I had done a good and loyal thing, that even though I was the heir, the king-to-be, it was my duty to protect what my brother loved, to retrieve what he broke." He looked down at his hands. "I was the heir, the crown prince, and then the king. But he was always the favorite, the beloved, the sun they all orbited. And I have spent my entire life climbing cliffs in storms, retrieving the broken things he leaves behind, while he moves on to the next bright, shining moment." The story settled in the quiet room, a perfect, heartbreaking metaphor. And in that moment, Sarah understood. Dimitri had known about the affair, had watched his brother seduce his own guardian with promises and lies, had said nothing, done nothing, because confronting it would have forced her to face a truth she wasn't ready to see. He had simply waited, and when Alexei had shattered her heart as carelessly as he had flown that falcon into the cliffs, Dimitri had been there to help retrieve the pieces. Not because it was his duty, but because he had been in love with her all along. She reached across the space between them, her hand covering his on the table. His skin was cool, his fingers long and strong. He flinched at the unexpected contact, but he didn't pull away. He turned his hand over, his fingers lacing with hers. His grip was firm, grounding. "You're not in his shadow, Dimitri," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She said his name without his title for the first time, and it felt both terrifyingly intimate and perfectly right. "Not to me. You are the king. The real one. The one who keeps us all safe while he smiles for the crowd. The one who protects even the things he has every right to be angry about." He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. The carefully constructed walls around him seemed to crumble, revealing the lonely, loyal man within. The lamplight danced in his dark eyes, and in their depths she saw not a shadow, but a quiet, powerful light that had been waiting, patiently, for her to finally see it. They sat there for a long time, holding hands in the quiet library, and the silence was no longer a container for grief or secrets, but for a fragile, honest, burgeoning hope. The day of the wedding dawned unnaturally bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The castle was a hive of frantic, joyful activity, a stark contrast to the quiet tension that hummed beneath Sarah's skin. Dressed in her finest ceremonial armor, polished to a mirror shine, she was a statue of military perfection. Inside, her heart beat steady and sure. Her position on the cathedral dais gave her a panoramic view of the spectacle. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and melting beeswax. The stained glass windows had been specially treated to filter the sunlight, muting its strength so the Moroi guests could attend comfortably without the weakness daylight brought to full-blooded vampires. It painted the marble floors in jewels of muted, colored light. It was a fairy tale, a perfect fantasy, and it left her completely cold. She watched as Alexei, resplendent in gold and white, walked down the aisle, his smile as radiant as the filtered sun. He could tolerate daylight better than most Moroi, his bloodline strong, and he used it to his advantage, standing in the light while others sought shade. He was the perfect prince, the dream made real. The assembled Moroi lords and Dhampir ladies sighed as he passed. He was everything they wanted him to be. She felt nothing. No longing, no regret, just a distant observation of a man she had once believed she loved, a man who had never deserved her. Then came Seraphine, a vision in silk and diamonds, her full-blooded Moroi beauty so flawless it seemed unreal. The orchestra swelled. It was breathtaking. Sarah's eyes, however, were not on the bride or the groom. They were on the man who stood beside his brother at the altar, a severe, dark figure in the midst of all that light. Dimitri. His face was a mask of stoic duty, but Sarah could see the tension in his jaw, the rigid set of his shoulders. She noticed how he stood slightly back from the direct rays of filtered sun, conserving his strength. He was not a participant in this joy. He was its guardian, its warden. His gaze swept the crowd, constantly assessing, constantly aware. He was working. Their eyes met across the altar, a fleeting, fractional glance, but in that instant, a silent conversation passed between them. He saw her. He acknowledged her presence. A small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. It was everything. The ceremony unfolded, a litany of ancient vows and sacred promises. Sarah stood at attention, her body rigid, her senses on high alert. But her mind was on the man at the altar. She thought of his confession in the library, of the lifetime of quiet duty and thankless loyalty he had described, of the 6 years he had watched her love his brother, had known about the secret affair, and had said nothing because she had needed to see the truth herself. She saw him not as just a king, but as a man who had been defined his entire life by what he was not. Not the beloved, not the charming one, not the favorite son. And yet he was everything that mattered. When the high priest declared Alexei and Seraphine bound for eternity, the cathedral erupted in thunderous applause. The bride and groom sealed their union with a chaste, public kiss. As they turned to face the cheering crowd, Sarah watched Dimitri. He was the first to clap, his expression unreadable as he looked at his brother, the golden prince who had finally secured his perfect, shining future, while the king who made it all possible stood in his shadow, the brother who had taken his guardian's heart and broken it without thought. For a moment, Dimitri looked profoundly, utterly alone. The reception was even more opulent than the betrothal ball, a dizzying spectacle of wealth and power. Sarah remained on duty for the first hour, a silent observer at the edge of the celebration. She watched Alexei dance with his new bride, laughing and spinning her around the floor. He was happy, or at least he was performing happiness flawlessly. He never once looked her way. Their secret was buried, safe, forgotten. When her replacement arrived for the evening shift, she was officially off duty. She moved through the crowd, invisible in her way, and felt a presence fall into step beside her. "A successful day," Dimitri said, his voice low. He held 2 glasses, one of champagne, one of blood wine. He offered the champagne to her. She took it without protest this time, their fingers brushing as the glass changed hands. A rare, small smile touched his lips. "Walk with me?" It was phrased as a question, not an order. She nodded. They walked through the glittering crowds, past the laughing nobles and the happy couple, and made their way to a quiet terrace overlooking the gardens. The noise and the light of the party felt a world away. "He seems happy," Sarah said, the words tasting strange. There was no jealousy in them, no pain, only a distant clinical observation. "He has what he has always wanted," Dimitri replied. "Adoration, a beautiful queen, a secure bloodline. He will continue to charm the court, to be the beloved prince, and I will continue to rule in the shadows. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "And what is it you have always wanted?" she asked. The question hung in the air between them. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. The party noise seemed to fade into a dull roar. "I confess," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have wanted the same thing for 6 years. But she was not mine to want." His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. "I want a partner I can trust, a mind that is as sharp as my own. I want a loyalty that is earned, not demanded. I want someone who is not afraid of the dark, who can stand in shadows with me and call it home." He paused. "I want someone who knows the difference between promises made in secret and vows spoken in the light. Someone who would never abandon her calling, because being a guardian isn't just what she does, it's who she is." His voice dropped even lower. "I want someone who was never mine to protect, but whom I protected anyway, because I could not help myself." Each sentence was a key turning a lock deep inside her. He was not describing an abstract ideal, he was describing her. And he was confessing that he had loved her through all of it. Through the secret affair, through the heartbreak, through everything. He was seeing her, all of her, the guardian, the strategist, the woman who had been foolish enough to believe in secret promises, the warrior who would never abandon her calling for anyone. And he was saying she was enough. She had always been enough. She couldn't breathe, words failed her. All the pain and confusion of the past year, all the quiet moments and unspoken tensions, all of it coalesced into this single, stunning moment of absolute clarity. "The roof," she said, her voice husky. "Meet me there, when you're ready." It wasn't a question, it was an invitation. A choice. She was inviting him into her sanctuary, the one place that had always been only hers. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He gave a single sharp nod. "I'll be there." She handed him back her glass, their fingers lingering for just a moment, and walked away. Not to hide, not to run, but to wait for him in the light of the moon and stars. The wind on the eastern battlement was just as sharp as it had been all those months ago, but tonight it didn't feel lonely. It felt cleansing. The city lights below were a familiar, comforting tapestry. She wasn't escaping anything tonight. She was choosing, actively, consciously, in full knowledge of what she was doing. She didn't know how long she waited, but eventually she heard the scrape of a boot on stone. Dmitri appeared, a dark shape against the moonlit sky. He had shed his formal coat and was in his simple black tunic. Night had fully fallen, his time of greatest strength. He came to stand beside her, but this time he didn't keep a careful distance. He stood close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin, close enough that if she moved even slightly, they would touch. "I wasn't sure you would come," he said, his voice quiet. "You said you would be here," she replied, turning to face him. "You've always been here. I was just too blind to see it." He looked at her, and in the pale moonlight, she could see the lifetime of loneliness in his eyes, the weight of a crown worn in shadows, the pain of 6 years spent watching her love someone else, and the dawning of a new, fragile hope. He was a man made of promises kept, of silent vigils and thankless duties, a king who ruled in darkness so others could live in light, a king who had loved his brother's secret in silence and had never once made her feel ashamed. "Sarah," he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer. She closed the small distance between them. She reached up, her hands finding their way to his face, her palms resting against the cool texture of his jaw. He was real, solid, here. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for it, a king who had never been touched with tenderness by the one person he wanted. She didn't say, "I love you." Not yet. The words felt too small for what needed to be said first. "I'm sorry," she whispered instead. "I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry I wasted 6 years on secret promises when you were here all along, making real ones without ever asking for anything in return." A single tear tracked down her cheek. "I'm sorry you had to watch. I'm sorry he took from you without thought. I'm sorry I—" He opened his eyes and caught her hand, bringing it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that was achingly gentle. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You hoped. You trusted. You loved. Those are not sins, Sarah." His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tear. "And I would watch it all again, endure it all again, if it meant you would be standing here with me now, finally seeing me, finally choosing me, not in secret, not with hesitation, but here, in the moonlight, where anyone could see." The difference crashed over her like a wave. Alexei had wanted her in secret, had made her something to hide. Dmitri wanted her in the light, something to claim openly, consequences be damned. "I'm choosing you," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Not because he didn't want me, but because you do, because you see me, because you waited, because you never made me a secret to keep." She lifted her other hand to his face, holding him as he held her. "I'm choosing you because standing in the dark with you feels more honest than any promise ever whispered to me in secret." Instead of more words, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss stolen in shadows. It was not a secret to be kept. It was a choice made in moonlight, a claim staked openly, a beginning written in starlight. He responded with a tenderness that stole her breath, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious, something worth the wait. His lips were cool, gentle, and in his kiss she tasted his patience, his strength, his loneliness, and his unwavering devotion. It was a kiss that tasted of truth and promises that would be kept, of love that didn't need to hide. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same cold night air. The sounds of the celebration were a distant echo. "I am not the sun, Sarah," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I cannot offer you a world of brilliant light. I am a creature of darkness, strongest in shadow. I cannot give you secret romance or stolen moments or pretty promises." She opened her eyes, looking into his. "Good," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I spent 6 years with secret promises and stolen moments. They were worth nothing." She lifted a hand, her fingers gently tracing the line of his brow. "I don't want secrets anymore, Dmitri. I don't want to hide. I want what's real. I want what's honest. I want to stand in shadow with you and know that when dawn comes, you'll still be here. That you'll still want me. That I'm not something you'll discard when the sun rises. I want someone who keeps his promises, and you've kept every single, even the ones you never spoke aloud." A slow smile spread across his face, a true, unguarded smile that transformed him completely. It was a sight more beautiful than any sunrise. He was not the overlooked king. He was not the shadow. He was hers, chosen freely, claimed openly. And on the cold stone roof, under the vast, starry sky, while the beloved prince celebrated his perfect, public wedding below, the Vampire King and his Dhampir guardian claimed their own beginning in the moonlight. No secrets, no shame, no hidden promises that would never be kept. Just two people who had finally found each other in the dark and who would face the light together. 6 months had passed since the wedding. 6 months since the night on the roof when everything changed. The castle had settled into a new rhythm, one that hummed with whispered speculation and barely concealed shock. The Vampire King. The dutiful, serious Dmitri, who had always done exactly what was expected of him, had done the unthinkable. The announcement had come 3 months after Alexei's wedding, delivered in the king's characteristically quiet, unshakable manner during a formal court session. He intended to take a consort, Sarah, a Dampier, his own guardian. The court had erupted, not in celebration, but in chaos. The Moroi nobility had been scandalized, outraged, horrified. A Dampier consort for a spare prince would have been controversial. A Dampier consort for the reigning vampire king was unprecedented, potentially catastrophic. The bloodlines would be diluted, the ancient traditions would be shattered, any heirs would be half-human, weakening the royal line for generations. 3 of the most powerful noble families had threatened to withdraw their support. 2 council members had resigned in protest. There had been whispers of rebellion, of finding a more suitable king, of ancient laws that could be invoked. Sarah had watched it all unfold with mounting dread, had begged Dmitri to reconsider, to choose someone appropriate, to protect his throne. She had told him she would resign from his detail, leave the castle entirely if it would spare him this political nightmare, that what they had wasn't worth destroying everything he had built. And he had looked at her with those dark, steady eyes and said simply, "I have spent my entire life doing what was expected, cleaning up messes, protecting what others broke, standing in shadows while others took the light. Watching the woman I loved keep a secret affair with my brother and saying nothing because she needed to find her own way." His voice had been firm, unyielding. "I will not compromise on this, not on you. And you will not resign. You are the best guardian in this kingdom. That doesn't change because I choose to love you openly instead of watching you love someone else in secret." The battle had been brutal and quiet, fought in council chambers and private meetings, in late-night negotiations and carefully worded decrees. Dmitri had been relentless, patient, immovable. He had reminded the nobles that Dampier guardians had protected their families for generations, had bled and died for Moroi's safety. He had pointed out that half of the royal guard, the elite forces that kept them all safe, were Dampier. He had made it clear that any family withdrawing support would find themselves without the protection of the Shadow Guard, would be on their own against Strigoi threats. He had leveraged every alliance, called in every favor, used every ounce of political capital he had accumulated through years of thankless service. And he had been willing to lose it all. That was what had ultimately won the day. Not the arguments, not the political maneuvering, but the absolute certainty in his conviction. The nobles had seen that the quiet, dutiful king they had taken for granted was made of iron, that he would burn his own throne to ash before he would compromise on this, before he would hide her the way his brother had. And slowly, grudgingly, the opposition had crumbled, not into acceptance, not into celebration, but into resigned acknowledgement. The king would have his Dampier consort, and she would continue as his guardian, a position she would never relinquish, a calling that defined her as much as her love for him. Now, Sarah stood in the private garden, not the one where Alexei had made his secret promises, but a new one, theirs alone, and Dmitri found her there, as he always did, his footsteps quiet on the stone path. Night had fallen, his time of greatest strength, and she knew he had just returned from feeding, the color restored to his face. He came to stand beside her, and she leaned into him, feeling the cool solidity of his presence. "The council meeting went well," he said, his voice low and calm. "Lord Stavros has agreed to the new Dampier protection accords. Lady Valamont is considering a Dampier alliance for her youngest daughter's guard. Small victories. Inch by inch, he was changing their world, making it so that what they had wouldn't just be tolerated, but accepted, so that other Dhampirs might have the same choice. "You gave up so much," she said quietly, the guilt still a weight in her chest. "Your political standing, your allies, your—" "I gave up nothing that mattered," he interrupted gently, turning her to face him. His hands cupped her face with infinite tenderness. "Sarah, I spent my entire life being the king everyone needed. Dutiful, self-sacrificing, always putting the crown first, watching my brother take whatever he wanted, including you, and saying nothing." His voice roughened with emotion. "But a crown is just metal and jewels. It's cold. It doesn't keep you warm on a freezing roof. It doesn't stand beside you in the dark. It doesn't see you. It doesn't love you." His dark eyes held hers with devastating intensity. "You asked me once what I wanted. I want this. I want you. Not in secret, not hidden away like something shameful. I want a life that is mine, not just an endless series of duties and watching others take what should have been mine all along." His thumb traced her cheekbone with aching gentleness. "Let them whisper. Let them scheme. Let the nobles clutch their pearls and wring their hands about bloodlines." His voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "I am the Vampire King. I have protected them, fought for them, bled for them in shadows while they celebrated in light. I cleaned up my brother's messes, retrieved the things he broke, and said nothing when he stole 6 years from both of us with his lies. And I am choosing you, openly, publicly, every day, every night, for the rest of our immortal lives. No secrets, no shame, no hidden promises, just truth." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. 6 years ago, she had loved a prince who had offered her nothing but pretty lies and secret moments, because she could never cost him anything. Now she stood in the arms of a king who had risked everything: his throne, his power, his carefully built political alliances, because she was worth it, because he refused to make her a secret the way his brother had. "Alexei asked me yesterday if I regretted it," Dmitri continued, a wry, almost bitter note entering his voice. "My beloved brother, in his infinite charm, wanted to know if I thought the political turmoil was worth it, if I wouldn't have been better off pretending I didn't know about your affair, if I shouldn't have just let things continue as they were." He smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made him look younger, lighter, free. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my life, that I was done retrieving the things he broke and pretending not to care. "And what did he say?" Sarah asked. "Nothing of substance. He doesn't understand. He's never had to fight for anything real. Everything he wants falls into his lap, and when it breaks or becomes inconvenient, someone else deals with the consequences." Dimitri's thumb traced her cheekbone with aching gentleness. "But you, Sarah, you were worth fighting for, worth standing before the entire court and claiming, worth risking a crown I never asked for but have carried faithfully for years, worth telling the world that I loved you for 6 years while you loved my brother, and I would wait 6 more if that's what it took." "They will come around," he said with quiet certainty. "Or they won't. Either way, I am the king, and you are mine, not in secret, not in shadow. Mine to claim openly, to love publicly, to stand beside in the light of day. That's all that matters." And standing there in their garden, in the shadows where they both belonged, Sarah finally understood the true measure of the difference between the two brothers. Alexei had loved her in secret because she could never cost him anything. Dmitri had claimed her openly because she was worth everything. "I love you," she whispered, the words finally feeling adequate for the vast, consuming thing between them, for a love that didn't need to hide. "I know," he replied, pressing his forehead to hers. You stood in the daylight and chose to join me in darkness. You walked away from secret promises and chose honest vows. You refused to abandon your calling even when I offered you every comfort of the palace. You are my guardian still, my partner always, my consort now. You are the bravest person I know, Sarah. Braver than any king. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent and eternal. Inside the castle, the Moroi court whispered and schemed and slowly, grudgingly, adjusted to their new reality. And in the garden, the vampire king held his Dhampir consort and knew, with absolute certainty, that he had finally stopped climbing cliffs for things his brother had broken. "Let the sun have the day," Sarah murmured, echoing the words she had spoken on the roof 6 months ago. "And the night belongs to us," Dimitri finished, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of moonlight and hard-won victories, and a love that had cost everything and was worth every sacrifice. A love that didn't hide in shadows, but claimed them as home. A love that had survived 6 years of secret lies and had emerged into the light as truth. The Vampire King had finally stopped being his brother's keeper. He had found something whole, something real, something worth burning the world for. And in the quiet revolution of a king choosing love over duty, choosing a Dhampir guardian as his consort while she continued to protect him as she was born to do, choosing truth over secrets and light over shadows, the vampire court would never be the same.